Hi, I'm Justin with Roland Professional AV, here to give you a quick update on all the new features added to the V-160HD with firmware version 2.0. This is a free update and it's absolutely loaded. If you haven't done an update before, click on the last chapter of this video for a walkthrough. Let's start with macros. You can now record your steps. You can press and hold any of the 10 mode buttons in macro mode to record to it. But if you want to record and edit using the control software, open the macro editor in the RCS software and you'll see a record button. Proceed to press buttons and move knobs to record your actions. Once you're finished, click apply to save the steps and you can edit them if needed. Remember, if you need more than 10 steps, you can have a macro play another macro. So it's helpful to have functions like turning off all picture-in-picture windows in a separate macro that multiple macros can share, which also means less time spent adding redundant steps. Check out the default macros 11 through 18 for examples of this. There's also a new macro command to turn the fade time for preset scene memories on or off. This is helpful when you want to change scenes while all the composition layers are off. Next, go to the panel operations setting in the system menu. There are two modes, Dissolve and Program Preset 20. Dissolve turns the V-160HD into a 16 input switcher. Buttons A1 through A8 switch to HDMI inputs, and B1 through B8 switch to the SDI inputs. Buttons 9 and 10 on both rows are assigned to still 1 and 2 by default. Simply press an input button to switch to it. Cut and auto function as transition type buttons. They do not perform the actual transition. You can assign different sources to the buttons in the video assign menu. Note that by default, these changes are reflected for the first 8 inputs on the multi-view, but not 16 input view. To set up or rearrange 16 input view, go to the 16 input view layout in the system menu and change the assignments there. Program Preset 20 mode gives you more control over your switching. It's much like Dissolve mode, except that when you press another input button, it turns green and goes to preview. Here, the cut and auto buttons perform the transition, just like they do in AB in the standard Program Preset modes. Note that 16 input view will not display composition layers, so it's recommended to have a separate output that displays program or the multi-view when using these modes. Let's move on to the new output frame rates. Go to the system menu and you'll now see additional options for the frame rate setting. The inputs can still be a combination of frame rates. They do not need to match this setting. Note that this affects all outputs, including the USB streaming output. If you set the value to 30 Hz or less, then the option to cut the USB frame rate in half is disabled. Next, the AUX video output can now display composition layers, which means you can add a DSK logo to your AUX out. Go to the video assign menu and scroll to the end. You can modify the AUX layer just like the program and subprogram layers. By default, they are all turned off for AUX. Turning it on keeps it on at all times, and Program Sync only displays that layer when it's displayed on program. For those of you not familiar with subprogram, it's a copy of program, but you can show or hide different composition layers. This is an easy way to create clean program by simply turning off all the layers for subprogram. Let's now head back to the system menu and enter the new output format submenu. When the system format is set to 1080p, each SDI and HDMI output can be set independently to output either 1080p or 1080i, and the USB output can be either 1080p or 720p. If your system format is 720p, all outputs are 720p and the subsettings cannot be adjusted. For those of you working with multiple tracks of embedded audio, there are new embedding tools to make things easier. For each SDI and HDMI audio input channel, you can choose a different pair of audio channels to use. The default setting is channels 1 and 2, which is fine for most users. But if you ever need to use 3 and 4 or 7 and 8, you can set it here. In the audio output menu, go to the embedded menu to add additional audio sources to the HDMI and SDI outputs. You can create separate configurations for HDMI and SDI, but all outputs of the same type share the same settings. This feature requires a destination device that supports multi-channel audio. For example, a hardware recorder that captures video and multi-channel audio will get your main mix, plus any additional sources you embed to it. One example is if you have a show and you want to keep the music separate for editing later. Create a mix minus with just the dialogue and embed the music to channels 3 and 4. Finally, there are some additional changes worth mentioning. You can now back up just your scene memories in the preset memory menu. Previously, you could only do this with just macros or all of your settings. Picture-in-picture and DSK layers now trigger audio follows video if enabled. This now means that if you can see it, you can hear it. If you have a laptop with a remote guest in a picture-in-picture window, you can have audio follows video automate their audio so that when you turn off their picture-in-picture, they're muted. If you do not want this to happen, you can disable audio follows triggers for each composition layer at the bottom of the audio follow menu. And auto switching can now switch the picture-in-picture or DSK source directly, regardless of the input assigned value. You can also set the auto switching key type to target any of the composition layers instead of the background layer. And if you have a numeric keypad, you can now set it up in the RS-232 menu to control the V160HD. It works just like the foot switch control. This adds 16 buttons you can customize. I left out a handful of small additions and fixes. For a complete list, check out the release notes on the firmware download page. To update the firmware on your V160HD, go to proav.roland.com, click on Video Switchers under Products, choose the V160HD, and scroll down a bit until you see Downloads. On the list, click on System Program, also known as firmware. This page contains detailed information on every update, as well as steps on how to update, with the download button at the bottom of the page. A 16GB or less USB flash drive is recommended for the update. Connect it to the front of the V160HD and format it in the USB memory menu if you have not already. Once the update is downloaded, unzip the update file and copy it to your USB flash drive. Make sure that the file is not in a folder on the USB flash drive. It needs to be in the main directory. Power off the V160HD, connect the USB flash drive, and hold down 3 buttons: Picture-in-Picture 2 program, DSK1 program, and DSK2 program. Power it on again and continue to hold these buttons until the other buttons start to flash, and wait for it to load the update menu. On the LCD screen, it will ask you to press enter with the value knob. When finished, the LCD screen will display complete. Please restart. Power the V160HD off and back on again. Note that the first time you turn it on after an update, it may take a bit longer to load. This concludes all the new features in the version 2.0 update for the V160HD. We hope these are helpful additions to your workflows. And if you have any questions, please contact support at roland.com/backstage. Thank you for watching.